This is The Wire for 2300 Zulu, December 4th, 2025. Precedence is routine. Information cutoff is 2200. Bottom line up front. Enoch Burke indefinitely jailed in Ireland. J6 pipe bomber allegedly identified. Beginning with international events. In Ireland, yesterday Enoch Burke was sentenced to an indefinite prison term as the culmination of a long-standing scandal comes to a head. Burke was initially arrested for refusing to use a transgender person's pronouns during his job as a teacher back in 2022. Burke did not bow to this agenda and desired to continue his job of being a medical teacher as he had done for many years. This snowballed into a gargantuan legal battle over the past few years, which has culminated in his termination from employment. He has been imprisoned several times since the scandal first began years ago. The court cleared him of speech crimes some time ago, but the school was able to find a judge who would help them ban him from the school grounds, but more specifically hold him indefinitely, as long as he resisted their efforts to make him cave to their demands, namely that he use the pronouns. Burke has continually tried to return to his job and physically enter the school to continue teaching, attempts which have been regular over the past few years. But this has now been shut down due to him being arrested and held in jail indefinitely. Analysts comment. This situation is obviously a longer saga that has been developing for some time. Burke, desiring to continue his work and return to the time before one student tried to ruin his life, has dug his heels in and turned activist, using his situation as an example of the sheer mental illness that has become enshrined in all facets of society. At this point, the two issues are now merged, the trespassing and the pronoun use. Burke is being indirectly targeted in this way because of his views on the transgender agenda, and the only way they could bag him was to get him for trespassing while he tries to continue his profession that was stable before the insanity began. Now it seems the proverbial final hill has been arrived at, maybe. Burke will be held in prison indefinitely, as long as he refuses to cave to the trans agenda, and whatever fantastical charges they can come up with will be applied if he doesn't do so. Right now, he's effectively been sentenced to life in prison for contempt of court, as this Irish standoff situation will continue for as long as he holds out. All of the pro-trans mainstream media are quick to fact-check this situation, even though the persecution is clear as day. If Burke were to cave to the insanity, the trespassing charges would be dropped, and he would immediately be re-employed without question, even if nothing more than to serve as a reminder that the insane ideologies of the day will break anyone. So far, however, Burke has not broken, and he will be in prison for what is likely to be a very, very long time because of it, unless the situation changes due to national outrage, which has been building. On the home front in Washington, D.C., this afternoon the infamous J6 pipe bomber was allegedly identified as Brian Cole Jr. of Northern Virginia. A raid was conducted at Cole's home, which resulted in his arrest. Analyst comments for this wire. This case is probably one of the most sketchy situations to come to light regarding the entire J6 fiasco, and this is a massive can of worms that has been debated endlessly over the past few years. As a bit of backstory, for the longest time the general theory was that the J6 pipe bomber was a government agent of some kind, as evidenced by the wealth of congressional testimony involved in the years after the incident. There were a lot of suspect things that day, but the pipe bomber story smelled like the classic clandestine shenanigans that occur within the Beltway, so that was the assumption for the longest time. Last month, The Blaze published a report which reportedly relied upon gait analysis techniques to identify the way the alleged bomber walked. This analysis produced a name, who they claimed was a DC police officer at the time who transitioned to being employed by the CIA. At the time, this report seemed far-fetched, mostly because the gait analysis, which is a real analytic technique, relied upon too many variables for any sort of conclusion to be arrived at beyond reasonable doubt. At the time, this line of analysis was interesting, but mostly a shortfall as the field of criminal justice requires a lot more than experimental analysis to be definitive. Gait analysis is a real thing in the world of intelligence analysis and good for indicators and other very specific investigative needs, but positive ID is hard to do. As such, this initial report was mostly ignored by anyone serious. Journalists are not professional investigators, nor do they often rely upon structured analytic techniques to form an analysis. Plus, the integrity of journalists, particularly The Blaze in general, is called into question due to long-standing issues. Journalists have many different motives to conduct such efforts. However, the timing of today's arrest is incredibly suspect and without question points to something going on here. The Blaze may or may not have been wrong in their initial assessment of who the bomber was, but they certainly kicked the hornet's nest enough that federal agencies felt the need to actually produce a name and tie up this case in a neat little bow. Adding to this is the sheer unbelievable nature of the evidence presented against Cole in the unsealed indictment. The FBI quite literally had his license plate number recovered at the scene, his cell phone data pinged him at the location in real time, as he walked through DC, and his credit card history neatly listed all of the components of the IEDs which he purchased from various hardware stores. And apparently, it took the FBI conducting a nationwide manhunt over a period of 5 years to identify him. Quite literally, all of this is wild speculation at best, but right now, anyone remotely familiar with how Washington works is fairly certain that something is afoot with this case. For 5 years, not one single shred of investigation was conducted to identify the bomber, and yet, just a few short days after a news group gets close to the truth, suddenly an entire investigation is conducted start to finish. Grandmas walking their dog at the wrong time on that day were arrested and interrogated instantly. But this guy presented an entire binder full of evidence, and somehow it took years to identify him. Everyone would have safely ignored the Blazes' outlandish theory if the FBI had done nothing. But now, the timing of all of this points to this whole affair being incredibly suspicious. It's always possible that the Blaze is correct. However, at this point, what's vastly more likely is that the feds don't want anyone poking around anymore, so they offered up a name to stop people from looking. As to the reasoning for why federal agencies want to put this issue to bed right now, it's impossible to know based on the information that we have been given. Maybe people were getting too close to the truth, maybe the people who organized the plot still work for various intelligence agencies, maybe many other different clandestine operations are going on to this day, which prying eyes might disrupt. It's impossible to know. Brian Cole Jr. may or may not be the suspect in one of the most suspicious days in American history, but what's quite clear is that the FBI is very much interested in making the American people think it's him. This concludes The Wire for 2300 Zulu, December 4th, 2025.